I call the Honourable Member Moana Mackie. Tēnā koe, Ms Mackie.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It is with great disappointment that Labour will not be supporting this bill at the first reading, but I do want to thank the Minister Amy Adams for providing a copy of the bill beforehand, and I reiterate to her that we are very committed at Select Committee to doing whatever we can to allay the concerns that we do have. Minister Adams, we actually had a conversation about it where we talked about some of the issues I was having, and I said to her, the purpose of the bill looks great. I don't think there'll be any issue, but unfortunately when we went through the detail of the bill, there were a number of fish hooks which popped up, which meant that on balance, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't a line call because it was, on balance meant that our concerns about the independence, and particularly the role of government ministers in choosing what the topics are, meant that we felt we couldn't support it at first reading, but we are very committed to working on this bill at Select Committee constructively to address some of those concerns. We did run it also by some outside stakeholders who agreed with us that these fish hooks were very real. But this is not at all a slagging of this bill, because I'm very pleased to see an environmental reporting bill before the House. And hopefully we can end up with a credible, robust, independent environmental reporting system that will inform generations to come of the state of the New Zealand environment. So if I just want to go into a few of the issues I think we're going to need to deal with at Select Committee. The first is the issue that the Minister referred to about the release of information. And I understand that with the use of Tier 1 statistical reporting, there are certain rules around how some of that information can be used, which are absolutely appropriate. And we're going to need to do, it's kind of pointy-headed stuff that Select Committees are good at, do some work around that Tier 1 reporting to make sure that Tier 1 statistical reporting is compatible with the way we do environmental reporting. And there may be some areas where it's not, but I think those of us who are geeks and like doing that sort of stuff look forward to getting into the detail of that at Select Committee. And I'm sure that we can find a way through to ensure that information that is currently in the public domain, I think that's where some of the concern has come in, which is that a lot of this environmental information from NIWA and other such organisations is already in the public domain, and we'd hate to see being taken out of the public domain. And I accept the Minister's assurances that that's not the intention of the bill, and that there may be instances where that information is sensitive, but I was very pleased to have the assurance of the Minister that there is no intention to remove information from the public domain that is currently there, and we'll just work through the details of how that's and how that appears in the legislation to make sure that that's the effect of the bill. When I come to I want to come to the substantive area of our concern, and as I said, when I read the purpose of the bill, which is to create a national-led environmental reporting system to ensure reporting on our environment occurs on a regular basis and can be trusted by the public, it's independent, fair and accurate, 100% agree, 1,000,000% agree. That's absolutely what we want. My fear is that the way it's being implemented does not meet the purpose of the bill. And in particular, around Clause 18, which is regulations, where the Governor-General may, on the joint recommendation of the Minister for the Environment and the Minister of Statistics by order in Council, make regulations prescribing topics to be covered in synthesis reports relating to a range of measures and topics to be covered in the domain reports. And my concern is that level of ministerial involvement in choosing what the topics are. And I understand from the Minister's comments in her speech that we will get more information at Select Committee about what those topics are and therefore what the risks are of having ministers so heavily involved. But with the greatest of respect, I get very nervous when I see things like this being put into regulation, particularly in a bill where independence really is kind of at the core of what it's about, ensuring that these statistics aren't seen to be being swayed in any way by the government of the day, whatever political stripe that government happens to be. And I've always felt it's much better to get as much as you can in primary legislation, so that this is Parliament's decision and Parliament's bill, and not simply topics decided by a national government or a Labour government, but topics decided by the New Zealand Parliament, which a national-led or Labour-led government then have to go back to Parliament to get permission to alter in any way. Which is not to say you can't have regulation to ensure flexibility around some of the finer detail of that. But to have the topics set entirely by regulation and by government ministers, I think could undermine the credibility of the system. As I said, when we get to Select Committee, we'll see how real that danger is. But it was something that jumped out at me right away, because if you're going to have any kind of credible environmental reporting system, then the topics are going to have to be consistent over time. So you can't be constantly changing the topics that are to be reported on, because then you're not going to have the trend data that you need. So the very kind of basis of a system like this is that you're going to be measuring the same things over a long period of time, and that there's going to be very little change in the way you measure things over a very long period of time. So if having this done by regulation is an indication that we expect to see a lot of churn and a lot of flux in the things that we're measuring, then I don't think that that's going to lend towards a particularly credible environmental reporting scheme or system. And if we know now what the topics are, if the counterfactual is true, and we actually know what these topics are that are going to be put into regulation, and they're not going to change a lot over time, and there's not going to be a lot of churn and flux around those topics, and why not have them in the primary legislation? So it seems to me the worry is that this is indicating that those topics are going to change, and we're not going to have consistent reporting, or we're going to be reporting on different things, or because if we didn't, then why wouldn't we put it in the primary legislation? Why wouldn't we make that stuff as clear as possible? These are the long-term things that we're going to be reporting on. These are the topics, and they're not going to change over time, because if they did, that actually undermines the integrity of trend data. So that's where my nervousness over Clause 18 comes in. And I am, again, with the greatest respect, I also have to say I appreciate the assurances from the Minister that these regulations are going to be used for the good of the environment. We were given those assurances in the Exclusive Economic Zone legislation bill as well. We were told that things wouldn't be done in regulation that would take away a community's right to have a say on offshore exploratory oil drilling, for example. And then what happened in regulation was that, in fact, and it's interesting you're sitting next to Mr. Phil Heatley. I'd love to hear that conversation. Minister Heatley actually promised that communities would be able to have a say through the marine consent process, and that was taken away. That was taken away under regulation. So I guess this is a case of not just looking at the bill, but looking at it in the context of the kind of behaviour we've seen from this government around regulation. And we have been burnt. And we were very burnt over the EEZ regulations where promises were made. We were told that these regulations were minor and technical and would only ever be used to ensure that, the easy running of that regulatory framework. And in fact, the regulation was used to seriously undermine the regulatory framework. So that's another reason why we'd like to see as much of this locked down as possible in primary legislation, and as little left to regulation, which I actually think is good parliamentary practice as well, as little left to regulation as possible. So there's just one other interesting thing, I think, again, which jumped out at us, which I'm sure we'll look at Select Committee. In Clause 7, it is, of course, again, the introduction of economic benefits in a bill that's about environmental reporting. So one of the things that will be reported on, and I note that this actually is in primary legislation, so this isn't being left to regulation, we've been quite upfront and clear that the government wants this to be reported on, is the economic benefits derived from utilising natural resources. And I would question how appropriate it is to have that in this environmental reporting legislation. So those are our concerns, Mr. Speaker, with the bill as it stands. As I said, we will work very constructively at Select Committee to address those concerns and hopefully end up with a bill that we can support, because environmental reporting is something that the Labor Party has supported for a long time. But those issues of ministerial guidance over what topics should be covered is an area of deep concern, because, again, with the greatest respect to the Minister, I think this has been one of the worst governments for the environment in living memory, quite frankly. One of the worst. And I can completely understand concerns that the general public have that they will, that when the data comes out, that they will use that government influence to sway what is actually being reported on. That's why this must be seen to be completely independent. Because, let's go through it, shall we? Exclusive Economic Zone legislation, you want to gut the RMA, not listening to the Land and Water Forum, mining on conservation land, giving the Minister of Energy the right to have a say on mining on conservation land, introduction of economic benefit tests for mining on conservation land that no one else gets. The list could go on and on and on and on. This government has been an appalling government for the environment, absolutely appalling. So it is really, really important that an environmental reporting scheme is seen to be completely independent, and I don't see how a scheme that has governments deciding what topics are going to be reported on can be seen to be completely independent, Mr. Speaker. So we will work very, very hard at Select Committee to make this better, and we'll work constructively, as we always do. Environmental reporting is important, but let's not do it in a half-hearted kind of way. Let's do it properly. Let's get this absolutely right, so that our communities, individuals, NGOs, governments, MPs of all political stripes can have confidence there is no government influence in what's being reported on, and have absolute confidence in the credibility reliability of the statistics provided.
Thank you.
The Honourable Phil Heatley.
Mr. Speaker, I stand to